Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is 1 o'clock, and we are going to get started. Thank you for joining us in the Emergency Solutions Grant, the 2018 Requirements and Invoice Process. The presenters today will be myself, Stacy Hawthorne, and also have Brian Miller. He's our HMIS IT consultant. This webinar will take about up to an hour and a half with time included for questions. We have muted all the lines of the attendees. There will be places for questions. You can either put in a chat box during the presentation as well at the end by selecting a raise your hand icon during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Also, the webinar slides had been added to an attachment, and they'll be posted on the pennsylvaniacoc.org/ESG. Important dates for the 2018 ESG. The contract started November 30th, 2018. So all the contracts you guys should have received, signed, had your commissioners or whoever signed and send them back to DCED so they could start the process for signatures through our end and our comptroller's office so we can get a complete contract. So if you haven't done that, please do so or check with your commissioner's office to make sure that the contract was there so they could sign and send it back. And that, again, that contract started November 30th, 2018. 50% expenditure deadline will be 9 months into the contract, will be August 30th, 2019. The contract ends May 30th, 2020, and you'll have 30 days after the end of the contract. Final invoice will be due no later than June 30th, 2020, as well as your closeout is due on that same date as well. Your success story and closeout is due June 30th, 2020. The process for invoicing is all ESG invoices will be submitted electronically into the HMIS database. I know we have some new grantees this year, and we have been doing electronic invoices for about 3 years now, I believe. So they're done electronically through HMIS. You obtain support documentation from your subrecipients, if you have any, for the payment process. Please submit one payment request for your agency, combining each request from your subrecipient. So, example would be if you have two rapid rehousing providers, you could submit your rapid rehousing provider number 1 plus your rapid rehousing provider number 2, and then also if you're going to submit something through your emergency shelter provider, you could put all of that on one invoice, and you can only submit one invoice at a time. Please review your payment request for accuracy, compliance to the program regulations, and against your program budget. Please ensure that you have complete documentation before submitting each invoice electronically. Please make sure you go over that before you submit it to us, because if anything's missing, then that holds up the process. So you must remember, because you have 30 days to pay your subrecipient from the date of your acceptance of the invoice, which is the date that you submitted to DCED for payment. This requirement is effective even if DCED does not reimburse your agency within the 30 days of your request, and that will be simply because of if it was held up, placed on hold, your 30 days does not start over if we have to send it back to you for completion or some changes or for some additional information that wasn't received the first time. So it's important to review and complete the invoice cover sheet, review and complete the payment processing request form, review the match worksheet, and once DCD approves your invoice, they'll notify you through email within 15 days if the invoice is complete. DCD will notify the grantee of invoice if there's any invoice issues, which is a place on hold issue, and provide an opportunity for corrections. So that time period for 15 days is our homelessness team office. We have 10 days to complete the invoice once you submit it, and then our compliance office has 5 days to process it. And then once it goes to the comptroller, they have 15 days. So that equals that 30-day process for from the time we receive it to the time you should be paid. And then next, DCD will process invoices in IDIS. You will not receive an IDIS setup letter. In order to process an electronic transfer of funds to the grantee accounts, an updated PEPP form is needed to ensure we have the correct account information. This form is needed every year for each contract. Receive a contract every year. We need a PEPP form for that year. If nothing's changed, you just repeat the process and send a new form. We don't go by the previous contract year. We need a form every year. So next is how to invoice. Invoices will only be accepted through the electronic system. We will review details later, but provide each agency with a proposed drawdown schedule will help with compliance. So that drawdown schedule, we normally send that out once you receive your blue back. We'll send out the drawdown schedule and it's just a proposed schedule to help you guys know when you should submit an invoice, give a roundabout estimate amount of how much you should submit each invoice according to how much you were awarded for your grant. So that, you'll be looking for that, or I'll be sending that out sometime in the next few weeks of a schedule and a dollar amount for each quarter on how much you should submit. You can submit more, you can submit less, but this is just kind of a guide to help you stay on point with your spending and to help you reach the 50% expenditure come the 9 months into the contract. Also, once you receive the contract, attached along with that will be your Appendix A, which is a list of services and the contract number. Appendix B lists budgets, and if there are any subrecipients, and your Appendix C is special conditions and assurances, and that's really important because that talks about risk analysis, if you had any renovations, what the requirements are for that, your modification and revisions, when you can do that and what's required, fair housing requirements, citizen participation plan, and your limited English proficiency. Also, reporting requirements, you are required to provide a success story and a closeout report at the end of the contract period. So when you submit your final invoice, that's when you will be you will have to do the success story first. You cannot complete your closeout until you submit your success story. So sometimes we get calls, asking, I can't find the closeout report. Where's the closeout report? Well, you have to complete the success story first, and then the closeout report will prompt then. So before you submit an invoice, you want to make sure that you completed and mailed your environmental review per funding category. If a category is exempt, you still must submit an exempt form. And so it's basically an environmental review is needed for all contracts. If there are different categories, 3 categories that you approve for, then you have to submit three environmental reviews. And these environmental reviews also must be uploaded in HMIS. And then you ask yourself, did you submit your PEPP form, which we just, spoke about that. It's your electronic payment processing request form. Must be currently registered with sam.gov. This is where you will receive your DUNS number. You want to make sure you review program regulations and you explain them to your subrecipients. And you want to make sure that you have entered a contract with your subrecipients. Verify that subrecipients are entering into an HMIS or a compatible database. Designated the contact person who will submit the invoices through PA-HMIS, and they have received their login credentials. If you have not done any of that, you might want to make sure you contact David or Brian for that. And have you verified and approved your budget in HMIS? So you want to make sure all these things are done before you submit the invoice. Also, before you submit an invoice, you want to make sure invoices from your subrecipients and request for payment at a minimum of once a quarter. You can submit invoices more often than one time a quarter. I know some grantees, they have more than one subrecipient, so in order for them, it's easier for them to keep up with their their spend down for each subrecipient. They submit theirs separately. They submit the subrecipient invoices separate, and they'll submit, as soon as one is approved, they'll submit another one, and they may submit invoices maybe 2-3 times within the quarter, just in order to keep track of their subrecipients because they have more than one or two subrecipients. So also have subrecipients entered beneficiaries into HMIS or a HMIS comparable database. The recommendation is that for the information is to be placed into HMIS immediately after intake. So you want to make sure that information is in the system right away. So at this point, are there any questions? Okay. Brian said no questions, so we're going to keep moving forward. And at this time, we're going to turn it over to Brian. Brian is going to talk about the management of the ESG contract invoicing in HMIS. He's going to do a demonstration on how to submit an invoice.
Pretty much.
Yep.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. This is Brian. What we're going to do now is actually give you an actual demonstration of how the ESG contract kind of looks in the process, as well as kind of go through, kind of do a demonstration of some of the options you have with your contract, with reporting, as well as, most importantly, the actual invoice process. So we'll walk through the invoicing itself within the HMIS system. Now, as Stacy mentioned before, every invoice contract is required to be submitted electronically through the Pennsylvania HMIS. For those grantees that are within the balance of state, or I believe Beaver County and Bucks County, they all participate in PA-HMIS, so they're already active within the system. For those entitlement communities, those are those counties that are their own COCs that don't participate directly within Pennsylvania HMIS. We still do require them to use the system for invoicing purposes, so you'll need to make sure that you contact myself or David Wethington, the HMIS Help Desk, to make sure we get you and your organization set up for at least invoicing activities. What I'm going to go through now is give a demo of the invoicing. For those that are grantees in the past, invoicing process hasn't changed at all from the previous years. We have added a little new requirement. This is for the entitlement COCs for submitting additional client data with their invoices. So we will talk about that during the process itself. The HMIS, just to give a quick overview, is a web-based product. You get a username and password. You can access it anywhere on the web itself. Within the system itself, you'll be giving a specific grant administration work group that allows you to process your invoices. So as soon as you log in, you'll basically be placed onto this screen, and we've got, different functions and reporting and everything like that we do for regular systems, so that's useful, especially for those that are participating in HMIS. But even those that are entitlements are going to focus on the ESG invoicing folder. This is a folder that is going to contain any of your ESG contracts. So by clicking on that folder, what it will do is it will automatically, based on your organization, pop up any contracts that you have. And each contract will be very specifically based on the year it was provided, as well as the DCD contract number, start and end date, and approved and current budget. So this is kind of the starting point, and everything underneath here falls within each individual contract. So some grantees that have been around for a while could have 2017, 16, 15, all of their different contracts here. So for the 2018 round, what you'll do is you go in and you'll see your 2018 contract. Before you can do anything, the first thing that you want to do is review your contract. There's basically an approval process for you guys to double check to make sure the information that's in the system, your budget, contact information is all correct within the system before you actually start invoicing. So you'll use this little action blue ball within the system itself with on the record, and you click Review Contract. What the system does then will open up and show you your what we call grant contract profile. Contains all the relevant information for your grant. So what we want you to do is kind of take a look at it, make sure the information is correct, address, contact person, make sure that that is correct as well, because that it defaults to every invoice, uses this single contact point. Same thing with the components and everything like that. But the other thing that you want to check is your budget itself. Since, of course, we're doing the invoicing, we keep track of all the spending, give you balances. You got to make sure that your main components are correctly funded out, as well as all the subcategories or subcomponents. So that's something that you definitely want to just take a quick glance and make sure that is correct and set up within the system itself. Now, once you've checked that over and everything looks good, what you do need to do is approve the budget and basically say, hey, everything looks good, and that will allow you to begin the process of doing the invoicing. So you can go ahead and hit Contract Approved. It also makes you check to make sure that you've reviewed the ESG webinar. Stacey said we are going to be placing that on the website, this up to date. So at least says that, hey, you were here live, or you at least watched it at the time before you actually used the system. Then you need to put in who approved the contract and basically the date that it was approved. And that just kind of tracks who did it and checks over it. Now, Stacey also mentioned an environmental review needs to be done. You do need to make sure that you upload your environmental review directly into the system. And we kind of use this choose file kind of search function within the system, and you'll see that a lot throughout the invoicing, as this is the way the system allows you to upload and store documentation within the system itself. So you want to make sure you click on that choose file, and the system will give you the basic Windows folder option where you can go ahead and go to a hard copy or a soft copy on your computer of your environmental review, whether it's a document or PDF, and you can go ahead and click on it, hit open, and the system will automatically upload it to the system itself. So that's where you want to put your environmental review. The last thing that you need to do before you can get approved is all the way down at the bottom, we have these grant contract performance targets. These are required as well, and it's basically the estimated number of households that you plan to serve over the life of the contract. As you can see, they're broken out by the component types, and they'll only show based on your funding. So if you only had rapid rehousing and homeless prevention, you would only need to put in targeted persons for those components that you are actually funded for. In the system, if you actually hit save without entering this information, the system will tell you missed a spot and point you to make sure that you do fill that out. Once you've done all that, you can hit save, and the system will acknowledge your approval. And then as you can see, the action buttons will open up. And now you can see you've got a whole bunch of different options here that relate specifically to invoicing. You can always go back and review the contract if you want, but you just want to make sure that it is approved to begin with. Okay, now we're going to move on to the invoicing. And one of the main options you use that with is the contract invoicing. So we're going to go ahead and click on that option. Now, this is the area where not only you submit new invoices, but you can also view, it actually gives you a tally of all the invoices you've submitted throughout this contract's life. And it actually keeps a running total of your contract amount, approved expenditures, pending expenditures, balance amount, and gives information within the invoice itself and totals it down at the bottom. So it's a nice little grid to give you kind of a look at your invoice history as well. And you can view old invoices as well, and we'll look at that once we create one. But up at the top, there's a Create New ESG Invoice button. Basically, clicking on that will start the process for a new invoice. And just to mention again, I know Stacey said it, we only allow one invoice to be submitted at a time. So this button will only be here if you have no current invoices that are pending. So you kind of have to go through the submit invoice, get it approved before you can submit another one. So since this is our first one, we're going to go ahead and click on it. And it brings up what we kind of call a workflow. And this kind of will walk you through all the different steps needed to complete the invoice and submit it to DCED. The first page is kind of like the general information, and what we collect is the invoice date. It's basically the date that you want to submit the invoice period, and that is usually the date that the payments cover that you are submitting. Invoice number. This is actually something that you guys can keep track of. We have, the HMIS has an internal tracking number for your invoices, but if you have a specific code or some kind of number system to kind of keep track of invoices, you can use that there. I know a lot of people just put 1, 2, 3, 4 as they go on, but that needs to be entered. And then you need to enter in the date that you have scheduled the payment with your subrecipient. As I said, the grant contact person or the invoice contract, that automatically fills in from the contract amount. That's the person we contact if there's any questions about it. Then we kind of get down to the actual what are we billing within the contract itself. Within the system itself, it will provide you with a list of all the grants that you have set up within the system. And it's mostly based on your components. So this is very important to kind of show which of your subrecipients you're actually invoicing for. As Stacey mentioned before, you can combine multiple different subrecipients into the same invoice itself, and this is kind of the way you do it, through the actual grants in the system as well as any additional grants that you may have outside of the system. So let's say with this grant, we are actually going to bill for HP, homeless prevention, as well as RRH. So you would make sure that you select, the specific components that you're billing for. And from this selection, the system will intelligently collect the payment information as well as require support documentation only based on what you select within this section. So it's kind of an important part of leading what kind of payments you're making on the invoice itself. Once you have done that, you can basically go ahead and hit save, and it will move you to the next screen. This is the payment request screen, and it will dynamically build based on the components that you picked, which include the 4: street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, or homeless prevention. And it will show each of the subcategories as well with your total budget amount, as well as what your balance is. So if you've done previous invoices, it'll actually show you your balance from invoices you've done in the past. So what you can do is based on what you're actually paying for or what you're looking for reimbursement, you put in totals for the amounts or the services that have been provided. And if you haven't provided anything for a specific subcomponent, you can just put in 0. And down at the bottom, there's always the default 2 components themselves for HMIS data collection and administration. Those will always be there no matter which invoice categories you select. So depending on which ones you choose in the first step, that's how many and what kind of payment options you will get here. So once you've filled in your payment information, basically you hit save and you move on. And that's basically, the system totals it up, and that's what's going to be your total invoice reimbursement amount. Then you get to the next screen, which is match payments. This is where you record what match sources you're going to use to match the payments that you made in the previous screen. It's a little more open, so what you need to do is each row is kind of its own record in itself. So depending on how many match sources, so I've seen invoices have a single match source, and I've also seen invoices have 8 or 9 match sources depending on the payments and how things are matched up for that specific invoice. But what you can do is enter in the name of the source. So we're going to say state, maybe CDBG money. And then what you do is there's categories to where you put the dollar amount for the match. So we've got non-ESG HUD, federal, state government, local government, private, other fees, and program income. So what you can do is put in the specific amount of what each match component is. And if you, like I said, if you have more than one, you can go ahead and put them in there. Once you've done all that, you hit save and you can move on to the next screen. And both of this information is all submitted to DCED for you. Okay, now once we've gotten through collecting the payment amounts and the match amounts, we kind of get into the documentation stage of the invoicing itself. This screen here is for invoice forms, and as mentioned before for Stacy, one of the 2 main ones that are required to be submitted, signed, are an invoice cover sheet as well as an invoice PPRF form. This system actually has the reports built right into the system for you. So once you get to this step and the payments have been all entered, what you can do is click on this screen, and the system will actually generate your specific cover sheet for that invoice. It'll fill out all the numbers correctly and put in all your grantee information. And as you can see, each one does need a signature to be entered for each one. So what you'll need to do is actually print this out. And what you do is basically once you load the report, use this PDF to open it up into a PDF. And then what you can do is then use it to actually print it out to your printer. And what you're going to do is take that to your signatory authority to get signed to submit with the invoice itself. Same thing with the invoice, the PPRF. All of the information should be in there along with the balances, prior approved, current amount. They also have a signature line, actually I believe that's it.
Yes.
As well as down there at the bottom. But this is the one that's required, right? That one, Stacy?
Yeah, and if there is any HMIS funds that you were requesting, then your HMIS contact person should sign that, as well as admin at the bottom. Yep. And on the invoice cover sheet, it should be an elected official should sign on the previous one, the invoice cover sheet. That should only be an elected official sign in that one, the previous one, the invoice cover sheet.
Gotcha.
Yep. Okay.
I'll try to save it. Because what you do is then print them out, and like you said, get them signed. And then what you need to do is take the signed ones, scan them in hard copy on your computer, and you'll need to submit them. So we've got the basic numbers and information right in the system, but basically we need the signed copy for you to submit it. So as you can see, you've got the signed invoice cover sheet. Point to it just like we did before, and you upload it. Now I'm picking random stuff, and it will show that it is collected. Now, we also have an invoice match fund sheet report there that you can print out for your records. That doesn't need to be submitted, but it is there. As well as we actually have an ESG CAPER report. That's basically if you are a participating HMIS, actually participate within PHMIS, you don't need to submit any more information than that. There's no client data required, because we already have it because it's in the system. Your subrecipient should be in the system. So this information is pulled directly out of the system.
And just to make sure, I just wanted to ask, excuse me, Brian, for the match funds form and the CAPER, that is required to be attached and submitted. Like Brian said, you don't have to fill out any match dollars or anything in there, but by the end of the contract period, you should have your dollar-for-dollar match amount total. Some grantees do submit, show all their match up front. Some of them sometimes show a percentage, whatever the amount they're requesting for the invoice at that time, they'll show that same dollar amount during that invoice, or they'll show it all at the end. We'll accept invoices clear up until the final invoice, but before we approve that final invoice, we will make sure that you guys did show and upload all your match, totaling the amount of your grant awarded amount.
Once you have done that, you go ahead and hit save, and you can move on. Now, at this point, what we're going to go into is, like we said, if you're an HMIS participating agency, we don't need any additional client data or anything like that because we have it. There is a change this year for entitlement communities. Those counties that received 18 grant funds and have their own HMIS system. In the past, we used to request what we kind of call an ESG CAPER, a standalone report that their system could produce to kind of show that they're collecting client data, and they would just upload it to the actual invoice itself. But it was just a standalone report. We've actually gone in the direction that we are now requiring a full CSV 6.1 import from their HMIS systems, which all HMIS should be required, should have the capabilities of producing a CSV 6.1 export. And what that basically is it's their full client data for their, and it needs to include all the projects, subrecipients, and grants included in the contract, and from the contract date all the way up to the current date. So it's basically every time they do an invoice, we basically want to see all of their grant data from the start of the grant up to the beginning. So it's like sending a refresh of the client data every time. So what that's going to do is it's actually going to take your data, and we're allowed to import it into the Pennsylvania HMIS, and then we'll be able to have the data in the system and compile information together for full statewide ESG reports. So what I'm going to do next is, if you are an entitlement, as you can see here, it shows perform CSV data import. You'll be prompted to actually perform this import within the invoice itself. We're going to cover a little bit more of the CSV import, kind of the requirements and what it means after the demo, get in a little bit details about that. But this is kind of how you do it once you get the CSV import file, which should come out of your HMIS, and it should be a basic zip file. What you can do is go in and it asks you a question, hey, do you want to perform it, or do you want to do it at a later time? We're going to go ahead and say yes. So then what the system does is it actually walks you through. We're going to go ahead and say ESG invoice CSV import. You name the import. And the import process is, once you have the actual file itself, it is pretty hopefully pretty straightforward. You pick the C6.1, you pick your organization, and your organization will be in the list itself to tell, hey, who's the import coming from. And then you need to browse. Then you need to browse to the actual zip file itself. To select it, and again, it should just be a standard zip file coming out of your HMIS, and then you hit the upload button, and the system will actually upload it to the system, and then what you kind of do is you just move through the steps. And once you've uploaded it, you basically hit save. The system itself will give you, this is kind of a review log. It's more or less kind of just tells you if there's any major problems with it. What we see 99% of the time, if you do have the file and it's spit out of your system, you're fine. So if you don't see any big errors here, you can go ahead and move on to the next step. Then what you do at this point is you are going to map up your program in HMIS with your project from your HMIS system itself. Because what we're actually doing in the Pennsylvania HMIS is we're recreating your own projects and granting the system to allow you to import your data. So basically, this is going to be a way of matching your name. Let's say we have an entitled community that has a rapid rehousing project. It may have a particular name. We named them pretty generic in the system, so you'll be able to tell, you'll be Entitlement County A Rapid Rehousing Project. So within these drop-downs, you'll basically be able to select and match up the names of the programs. And it's more, you're just going to be matching up the components, rapid rehousing to rapid rehousing, homeless prevention to homeless prevention. And then it tells the system where to place the data itself. I will apologize, it is not coming up here. We're actually on a computer, different computer than I thought we were going to be on for the demo, so I don't have the correct import file to show that for you, but we do have guides that do walk you through this process. Once you have mapped it out, and just like with the invoice process, you can have multiple providers and multiple programs together within a single invoice. The export will be able to handle all of that incoming data from the HMIS itself. And depending on the amount of programs, you just match it up. And once you've matched it up on your first invoice, all ensuing invoices will automatically match up itself. Once that is done, and you've done the name match basically, all you have to do is select yes to the import, and the system will import the data within the system. So that's one of the differences, the new requirements, and this is only for entitlement grantees that have their own HMIS that don't use Pennsylvania HMIS. And we'll talk a little bit more about the requirements of that later. Now, we're into the actual documentation section. This is where all the supporting documentation needs to be uploaded, and it's based specifically on what you're requesting payments for. So the system will pop up the specific component that you're billing for, as well as the specific, I guess, subcategory that you're billing for, as there's specific documentation that's required for each client that you've served under that category. So if you've only billed for rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention, you'll only have to update documentation for rapid rehousing and homeless prevention, and only the sections that you actually have positive money for. And the file works pretty much the same as the choose file thing. You click on it, and you basically can go ahead and upload information. Now, we only do allow one upload per section. So, and I know there's a lot of documentation, you know, if you're 10, 15 clients under one, you know, for financial assistance or case management in one area, you're probably going to have 15, 20 pieces of documentation, PDFs or Word documents. We don't have individual uploads for each of them. So what they need to be is all the documentation for that specific category needs to be put into a zip file, and then that single zip file can be placed within that upload itself, because the system will allow you to upload, you know, PDFs, Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, as well as .zip files. And what you can do is doing a .zip file is usually pretty straightforward. Within the system, let's say you've got, you know, put them all in a folder, you know, invoice number 1, rapid rehousing documentation. A lot of times it's built right into your computer where you can click on the files or select the files that you want, and you'll have a send to, and it's basically compressed zip folder. So that way you can say, I want these 10 files to be put into one single, you know, zipped file. When you do that, then you can rename that zip file to whatever is easiest to identify, invoice 1, rapid rehousing, that sort of thing. And that's the file that you want to upload to the actual system if you've got multiple documents. The system will go through these screens and require each section that you've paid for or requesting payments for. Now, as you can see, the system will allow you to kind of go through them. It doesn't require the documentation to be uploaded right then and there. Kind of gives you some freedom to work on the document, work on an invoice over time, upload documentation as you get it. But as you can see, we get to the final screen, and this is where you actually submit it. This is kind of like a total summary of everything. You know, the invoice period, what's your invoice total amount, match funds. But here's kind of the documentation overview, and it kind of shows, you know, what you've done and what you still need to do. So we uploaded the invoice forms, we did the CSV import, and this one is only going to be there for entitlements. But we skipped over the rapid rehousing and the homeless prevention documentation. It's not complete. So as you can see, it's not going to allow us to submit it. But you can always hit save at this point, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And you can always build an invoice and then go back to it at a later point. So I'm going to go back into it, and we click on the contract, and we'll go contract invoicing again. And now, as you can see, we've got our invoice down here, and it's currently in progress. In progress basically means I'm working on it, and it hasn't been submitted to DCD yet. So we don't have a new one. You can't create a new one, but you can always go back into using the blue ball down here. It's kind of ClientTrack's way to provide menu options for a record, and you can always continue the invoice itself. And you start from the beginning, but then you can just walk through, each screen, and you can even make changes if something changes throughout the process. You can always re-upload information. You can also delete them. They've got delete buttons, so if you have to reprint it out and get a resignature, you can delete it and re-upload it. With the CSV import, that's also why we kind of give you a no prompt to, hey, I'll do it later, or like in this instance, we've already done it, so I'm going to skip it. Now what I'm going to go ahead and do is upload the actual documentation. Save. So that we can go through a submission. And then save. So at this point, now we're at the final invoice submission, and as we can see, everything is all completed and complete. So there's no stop messages. It'll actually allow you to actually submit the invoice. Now, at this point in time, if you just hit save, the system is still not, the invoice isn't submitted yet. To actually do the official submission, you need to check this box here and then submit the person, put in the person that actually performed the title as well as the name, just to keep track, and we record that in the system. Once you've checked that box and entered that information and you're good to go and you're like, all right, my invoice is all correct, you can go ahead and hit save. At this point, all the information is electronically submitted to DCED, and at that point, we're going to go back in and go ahead and take a look at the contract invoice. As you can see, it is actually submitted, so it allows you to take a look at it and kind of track its status as it goes through. Now, once you have submitted it, there's no changes that can be made. You are locked in, and what the system does is it actually sends out an email directly to DCED to let them know an invoice got submitted, as well as it goes into a queue within the system that all grant managers here at DCED can pick up and review. I think there's a 10-day period to review the information and make a determination whether they approve it, decline it, that sort of thing. But you can always go in and review it and take a look at it and view the information within the invoice itself. I think a lot of times, unless there's problems with it, the DCED will go ahead and approve it, at which time you will actually receive an email from the DCED staff, grant manager that approved it, most likely Stacy, that says it was approved for the amounts and everything, to give you an update on where the status is for it. Now, if there are questions on it, the grant manager will reach out to you and ask you to take a look at, maybe there's missing documentation or questions about it, but they will reach out to the contact person of the grantee if there's any problems with the submission.
Yep, and then if there's things missing that you guys have to send to us, we will place it on hold, the hold status, which means it goes back to you guys for you guys to, attach or make the changes that we need, and then you send it back. If there's something simple, like, small things that, we just need to know or, we can fix on our end, then, like Brian said, we'll just reach out to you guys. Oh, and also keep in mind before Brian continues, once it's placed on hold, in that email, it says that you guys have 2 weeks to respond. And if you do not respond to the on-hold status, then once you get past that time period without responding and, sending it back, we reject the entire invoice and we will send it back completely. And you will have to resubmit the entire invoice all over again. correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not going to go through that process because it's an admin kind of side thing. So that's kind of how the invoice goes. So once this is approved or rejected, most of the time they're approved. You'll then get your ESG create new button again, and you'll be able to go through the process again and resubmit, and they'll basically line up down here to kind of give you a history of that information. A couple other things within it. There are in expenditures as well as match summary information views. So while the contract kind of shows balance totals and everything, we do have like quick screens that can kind of show you, hey, here's your invoice totals, what you've billed to each subcategory. Totals includes pending. So it kind of gives you a little bit of some math, some information to help with reporting, if this information is helpful. And another good thing about it is, especially with the invoice screen, within a lot of HMIS, there's a little print button up here that if you click on, it basically presents a nice printed screenshot, but it doesn't include all the menu or anything like that. So I usually put, display data in a better formatted suited for printing. And as you can see here, it comes out. It's a nice little report here. Go ahead and print it. Those are all throughout the system. So especially on the invoice screens and these grid formation screens, those can be really helpful to get a quick readout or printout of some of your totals that you're using. And I know Stacy also talked a little bit about success stories. You can use this option to basically enter in your success stories that you've had. You can submit one, and it's pretty straightforward. You go into it, and it'll show any success stories that you've recorded. And as you can see, there's none here since it's a new grant. You hit Add button, and it'll basically tell you what report it in. It's either the annual period or it is the closeout period. And you can go ahead, and it's got a nice text box to enter in your success story. And you can go ahead and hit save and enter in success stories right here. And you can enter them in pretty much at any time, and they can be used later on for reporting, especially the closeout reporting when you need to put in a success story. I think that is about it. We did release a new ESG annual report that is a requirement for DCED, just sent out the ESG grantees. So if you are an HMIS participating grantee, this report can be helpful to run, provide your client data for this report that is required from DCED. I think we just put this out about a week or so, maybe 2 weeks ago. So we've got that available within this section to help with some of the DCED reporting on that side. So while it was there, I just wanted to point that out. I believe that's the demonstration of HMIS. So if anybody, I don't know if anybody has any questions. I don't see any in the chat, so I guess we'll continue on with back to Stacy.
Thank you, Brian. Next, as Brian had mentioned in the demonstration, the invoice cover sheet, you download the invoice cover sheet produced for entries entered into the system and have the designated party scan and upload in the electronic section. The cover sheet must be signed by a chief elected official. We do check that. If you have not sent us or had the chief elected official give you permission to sign off on any of the invoices, you must submit that letter or approval every time if someone other than the chief elected official is signing off on it, or that is not at the level to sign off. The payment process request form same thing. You download that, produce from the entries entered into the system, and have the designated party sign, scan, and upload that into upload the electronic invoice section of the for PPRF. And whoever is basically completing the submitting the invoice will sign off on that form. Once you gather the support documentation for payment requests per category, which would either be street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, homelessness prevention, your HMIS, or your admin, you want to, each category should contain the documentation in a zip file and to be uploaded in the system, as Brian had demonstrated. And those are the categories and subcategories for each one: your street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, HP, HMIS, and admin. And not every time, of course, you will not have to submit for every category, because, of course, not every grantee is approved for every category. And then here's a little bit more information what Brian had talked about, the export. Brian, if you want to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Since this is something new for 2008, and again, it's for entitlement grantees, those counties, COCs that don't participate in HMIS. When we talk about that CSV export, that's not actually an ESG CAPER export. There's actually a specific HMIS CSV 6.1 export is what we're talking about. And what it is it is a file that should be produced by your HMIS that can provide client-level data, basically provides a zip file that has, the programs, grants, and clients that you served from the data that you entered into your entitlements HMIS. It should be in a zip format, and basically it's got the CSV files within the zip format itself. And again, your HMIS should have a tool or a process to handle that. Each CSV export should contain all the grants and projects receiving funding from the DCD grant. To make it easier, we kind of went with, just to include all of your grants and projects that are part of your contract from the beginning of your contract date to the current date of when you're submitting the invoice, basically every time. So you don't have to worry about, breaking it out for, which projects am I billing for what. So if you just send us a fresh upload of all of your, ESG data with each invoice, that should make it a little easier for everyone involved. And what we can do is take this CSV import, bring it into the system, and we'll be able to compile it with all of the other participating HMIS subrecipients and recipients, and have all of the data there together. So in the future, when this as we work through this process, we may be able to use this exclusively for ESG CAPERs, the annual CAPERs that are due, to use that as a source for all of the data directly within HMIS itself. Now, it can be the full HMIS version, or it can also be the SSVF version, because I know one of the popular versions are for veteran SSVF programs. They're required to do a monthly 6.1 CSV export to the VA repository. If your system can do that, the CSV export will work perfectly. So that's the kind of export that we're looking for, and it does need to be in the latest 6.1 format. So please reach out to Grant Manager or DCD if your system is not capable of generating the CSV export, or you have questions on it, and we'll try to provide some more specific information for it. Now, victim service providers, we know that a lot of times they are using a comparable database, and this is for both grantees that are participating and those that are entitlements. They're outside of the guise of the HMIS within the local jurisdiction. We aren't requiring them to do the CSV export. We know that there's comparable databases. Most likely won't have this CSV capability, so we're requiring the same thing that we have in the past for them, is the same ESG report or invoicing report that we used to require. So if you do any invoice and you say it's got a DV provider included within the invoice, you'll be required to also upload an invoice or caper to the invoice itself to kind of prove that the information at least is going into an HMIS comparable database or being tracked by some system.
Okay. Thank you. And then moving forward in supporting documentation when you're submitting the invoices, when you're submitting anything for rental assistance, a lease, the lease must be between the unit owner, the landlord, and the tenant, the program participant. And also, what constitutes an appropriate lease, you'll find that definition or that explanation in the federal regs in the 576106G, Section G. We do accept handwritten leases, but they must be legible. We must be able to read it. And make sure that the lease includes the landlord's name, the name of the tenant, the date the lease covers, the amount of the rent and the security deposit, the location of the property, and if tenants are responsible for utilities. And make sure you also attach the legal fees and the signature page of the tenant and the landlord that they signed. That's all you really have to submit as far as a lease. You don't have to submit the entire lease. Most of this information can be found on the first, second, and third page of the leases, and then of course the last page of the signature page being the last page. Total of 4 or 5 pages, pretty much. Just as long as that information is on those pages. Everything else we don't need to. You don't have to submit. And we also need the rental agreement, and the rental agreement is between the grantee or the subrecipient and the unit owner, which is the landlord. Next, we have example of bad handwritten leases. The first one, of course, it does not have all the information that's required for a lease. A lot is missing. What I have said on the previous page, the things that's required in the lease, at least. And then on the right-hand side, we can't even read it. It's not legible. So these are just some examples, and believe it or not, we still get some like this from our grantees. So just please make sure when, the landlord is sending the leases in to you guys, or to make sure that, the appropriate information is on the lease if they're at least handwriting it. Other supporting documentation for utilities, I just like to put in, I always add in here the difference between a final bill and a shut-off notice because there is a difference. A final bill is the last bill a program participant will receive before their services is shut off at a location because they are moving or, et cetera. And a shut-off notice is a final bill that a participant has received because they did not make a payment. As far as utilities, what is eligible under ESG is the gas, electric, water, sewer. Utilities that are not eligible are the phone, cell phone, or cable. And then I also just, we added in here just a example of what a final bill looks like opposed to a shut-off. Those are just the two examples that I just wanted you guys to see the difference so you'll know when you need to submit a shut-off, not a final bill. One of the other supporting documentation that we still, believe it or not, we receive issues with is it's important when you submit receipts of shelter purchases. Please make sure that they're legible, that we can read them, because we need to make sure that what you're requesting for reimbursement is actually eligible under ESG. So I know sometimes, when you're copying a receipt based on the ink or the printer, it's really hard to print off clearly. But it's important that if you want the reimbursement, we need to see what you're submitting on those receipts. So we have to make sure that it's an eligible cost under ESG before we approve it. So these are just some of the examples that we do get from our grantees sometimes. Cost allocation and indirect costs is just as simple as what it says here. All agencies must have a cost allocation plan to distribute shared or indirect costs. An indirect cost rate is an alternative to a cost allocation plan. Plan rates will be allowed for invoicing but are subject to review through fiscal monitoring. Costs may be found ineligible if the plan is not developed in accordance with the super circular and not applied according to the plan. Guidance will be issued on how these plan rates need to be submitted to DCED for acceptance. All questions on any cost allocation or indirect costs you can direct to our compliance monitoring division director, Brad Shover, or his staff in his office. Cell phone policy, that hasn't changed, where what we accept and what we don't accept. As far as acceptable landlines in the shelters, we accept we will cover the office. Sometimes you need a line for internet. Sometimes you guys have a line just for resident use and your case managers and security. We do accept cell phones. They are allowable. When I say accept, ESG will pay for a cell phone, but we only pay for one per job description that is directly related to the shelter or the program. So example would be for your security staff that is on duty, that is, use the cell phone while on duty. We will only pay for one cell phone. So it could be transferred to the next security staff person on the next shift. But, the one that we're paying for should be left in the office until the next person comes in or returns to work. So if you guys have, 3 shifts, 3 shelter, 3 case managers, 1 cell phone is used between all of those 3, meaning only we will pay for 1 line. Any questions? Okay, so it looks like we have some questions.
Yeah, the first one is the invoice cover sheet and PPRF. Do the original signed ones need to be submitted to DCED?
Yes. Once you get the original signatures, like Brian said during the demonstration, you upload them and submit those in with the invoice in HMIS. But unfortunately, we still need original signatures. So we accept the copied so we can continue moving on with the process so you guys can get, the payment on time, but we still need those original signatures. So yes, you must mail those in once you upload those into your zip file, but you mail the originals to me.
Question about cell phones.
Okay.
Will ESG also pay for 1 cell phone for street outreach? Example, both case managers share 1 cell phone for street outreach.
Yes, we will. For street outreach, we will. Yes.
That's it?
Okay, great. So moving forward, like Brian pretty much explained, this is just the process on invoicing. You, the grantee, when you start the process, your subrecipient, your grantee will, send you the documentation. You review it and you upload it into the system, or whoever's responsible for uploading it into the system. Then as far as the grantee reimburses the shelter provider sub within the 30 days. And then once you submit it, it gets to us, the DCD program manager. We review it to make sure it's eligible and fundable. We approve it, or we request additional information, which means the on-hold status or approval by email to the grantee for corrections and or approval. And then you, the grantee, will basically receive the payment preferred, method of payment preferred. And that's basically just a quick synopsis of what Brian went over. And again, like Brian had also said, that for every contract in the system, you, the grantee, have the ability to check the status of the invoice by going into the invoice tracking, the action button, and contact invoice. That is, you'll be able to follow and track exactly where your invoice is, whether it's under review with us or on hold with you, however all that works. But you'll be able to track that and keep invoice once you submit it. Any more questions?
As of right now, no, there are not.
Okay. So this is the end of our webinar. The last page is just for our homelessness team. And if you have questions that you might have forgot or, you later thought about, you can contact me and or Brian Miller. But you can contact me, but Brian's information is on the screen as well. We know some of this might have been, repetitive for some of our grantees, but believe it or not, we did have some new grantees this year that needed to hear this webinar. So we appreciate everyone taking the time out and participating. Thank you, and have a good rest of your afternoon.